So just give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. So what we are looking at is in learning outcome 3, we are going to be focused on understanding what is team, what is the difference between team and groups, and then what skills are required when people work within teams in different roles. Now, there is a bit of indicative content that we have to cover. So we'll be looking at this in 2 parts. First part would be to try and understand organizational structure and what type of teams actually get formed within the various types of organizational structure. And then in the second part, we are going to be looking at team dynamics. When I say team dynamics, what I mean by that, how teams are formed. We will look at the Tuckman's model of team building. Bruce Tuckman, he introduced a model of team building essentially way back in the 1960s. And we'll also looking at the work done by Dr. Meredith Belbin, who basically then introduced what are called team roles. When teams are formed, diverse teams are formed, big or small, there are different types of roles which people can take up within those teams. And that is what managers and leaders look at identifying in terms of their skill set, behavior, attitude, their background, and obviously then try and attribute a particular type of role to the team member so that they are able to contribute. And obviously, as a result, the team achieves the goals and objectives, or it at least formed from that aspect that the team would be able to work together. There'll be cohesion between the team in terms of cooperation and obviously positive working behavior, and that would lead to the achievement of goals and objectives for the organization. Now, in the second part, we're going to be more or less focused on understanding, I would say, the 2 models in particular. And these 2 models that we look at, if I just briefly bring them across, they would be Dr. Bruce Tuckman's model and obviously Dr. Belbin's model. Now, here we are also going to be looking at understanding different types of organizations in terms of structure first. And then at some stage, what we're going to do is look into understanding what are the different types of teams essentially which get formed within these type of structures. Now, have we heard about any type of organization structures? We're not going to be looking at reading into and studying in detail about organizational structures, but before we get into the types of organizational team, that means how teams sometimes can be organized across across different types of organization and their culture is what we want to understand the structures for. So any idea in terms of what are the different types of organizational structures that we know? Any guesses?
Yes, sir.
Go on.
Functional organizational structure,
right?
Product-based, matrix, and there are geographical based, and then they're customized. There can be also customizable structures for particular organization. Like Spotify has its own custom organization structure.
Absolutely. So there are generally 7 types of organizational structures that we look at, but these 7 types can also lead to the creation of different types of customized structures within different types of organizations. Now, as sometimes businesses, organizations can be of different size, and the size of the organization can be done on the basis of their ownership, their turnover, the number of employees which work within the organization, and to a certain extent, how many types of products and services does the organization actually bring to market. This, if we keep in mind, then there are 7 to 10 different type of structures which can be thought of that are currently prevalent today when we talk about different types of businesses, organizations, and how, when I say structure, how people work within the organizational structure to in fact talk about. It means that whether who they report into, who they manage, what kind of responsibilities they hold in terms of decision making, and in terms of the day-to-day responsibilities, what they execute, and how does it affect the organizational achievement of goal. So if I look at a small example here, without going into detailing of each of the structures, because some of that we will mirror when we discuss organizational teams. Imagine an organization of, say, 10 people, and you would typically see in that organization, each of that individual working would take up different role. So, for example, hypothetically speaking, if an organization has 10 employees, which is classed as a micro business in the UK, they would have certain characteristics, like their turnover might be between 85,000 to 200 or 350,000 pounds. They would have 0 to 10 employees within the organization. That organization could be, in terms of go-to-market, having different people working within different roles. So there could be a director of the organization, somebody who's in management. There could be marketing manager. There could be a sales manager. Somebody could be an HR person. Somebody could be managing finance, and there could be somebody in customer service or product servicing, or depend on what business are we talking about. They could be into customer services, or essentially, I would say front end services of the business. Now, when we think of these roles, it basically allows us to understand that, yes, there is a different type of, there is a bit of a structure. So the sales manager would report into the marketing manager would report into the director, the account, finance, or customer services team would report into an operations manager, and an operation manager in general would report to the director of the company. So this allows the organization to have smooth workflows. And in cases when information needs to be transferred or decision-making needs to happen, this structure would come into hand, because then people will know the hierarchy. They will know who they need to approach to in terms when they have problems, or essentially if there are issues which crop up, and who's going to be resolving those issues. Now, if we extrapolate this to a large or a small medium organization, SMB as we call it, anywhere which has between 11 to 250 employees, turnover between 350K to 6.5 million, you would generally see that this would have maybe lots of employees, lots of departments, lots of people working within those departments, and each of that department or that particular silo would have its own structure. So if you look at a finance department, if there are 250 employees in the organization, you would generally have somebody like a finance manager or a financial controller. Then you'll have a payroll manager. You'll have somebody who would manage accounts. There'll be somebody who will be managing finances side of things. And then it could also have somebody which could be, a banking or a merchandise manager, which typically would look after, partners, suppliers, orders, and things like that. So that itself would become a department. And that department would, or people working within that particular department, would report into the financial controller or chief financial officer, and he in turn would report into the CEO or the director of the organization. Similarly, you could think of structures of marketing, sales, product engineering, or finance, administration, and each of this, and even sales would be a different department, or business development, and they would have different employees working within it, and within that they would report into somebody. In some cases, you could have a sales manager, an area sales manager, a regional sales manager, and a country manager. So area sales manager would have assistant sales managers reporting into him. One area sales manager would report into a regional sales manager, and there could be different regions. For example, in the UK, if somebody is based out of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, you'll have area sales managers, and within those there will be different towns and cities. So there could be different people reporting into area sales manager reporting into the RGM, and that is how the structures would be. We also look at matrix structures. Matrix structures is when you have resources allocation happening across the organization, and sometimes you work with somebody directly, but you report into somebody else administratively into a different geography or a different location. So you might be working in the branch office and you'll be looking after sales, but you report into your sales manager, which sits out of the head office, and that would form a matrix structure. So when we look at different types of structures, depending on the size, scale, ownership, products and services, you could have different types of structures within the organization. And these structures would essentially be created primarily to help run the company in terms of its operations, smooth operations, essentially. And then these structures would also tend to provide some sort of a sanctity to how people would report, would work, who would they report into, and who has the decision-making ability to be able to get things done at the end of the day, make the decisions which are required so that the company as a whole is able to achieve objectives. Now, when we take this into further in terms of our understanding from a point of view of different types of teams, we will classify different types of teams on the basis of purpose, structure, and the role of that team member or the role of that person within that team. Now, when we look at organizational teams, they are generally created for very specific purposes, and they tend to address a unique need of the organization. That means here, if I talk in terms of examples, when I talk about functional teams, here, if you look at a marketing department within a company, they would form a functional team because they are responsible for go-to-market or creating messaging which is reaching the consumer and making them aware of the products and services which the company sells. If I talk about the sales team, they would be doing the outreach and essentially managing partners or suppliers or distributors in this case, and their aim would be to generate sales. And then when we look at product development or example, any other type of team like finance team, they are in one particular functional area of the organization, and their role is to, look at managing finances, purchase orders, inventory, receivables, and, overdrafts from the banks and things like that. So this is a functional area in which how you would generally see the teams being organized. Then sometimes we talk about cross-functional teams. So if we extrapolate the same understanding that we have on functional teams, but here, when sometimes projects are launched, or for example, company gets into introducing something important from a time-bound perspective, you would generally see individuals being brought across from different departments within the organization. Or maybe if I say so, the best talent tends to be brought across from different departments to be able to handle a particular job or a task which is required to be done. And in previous discussions, I've given an example that Apple sometimes brings together teams or individuals from different departments within the organization when they are looking at launching a new product in the market. So you have the vice president engineering, vice president marketing, vice president product, vice president design, and different types of individuals working in different types of organizations heading those functions sometimes are brought together to be able to launch the product to the market. And this tends to be when they're introducing a new product like an iPhone or a new product altogether from their stable. Now, in this case, you would generally see cross-functional teams because members are picked out from different departments from within the organization, depending on the area of their expertise and the ability for them to be able to collaborate and execute on the projects because of their prior experience and the skill sets they carry. So in those cases, we would generally see cross-functional teams coming across. We also talk about project teams. Now, when we talk about project teams here, they are formed for a specific reason. That means if the company decides to launch, and again, a case in point here would be when I look at the example of, product launch. Here, the product launch typically happens in, globally once or twice in about 18 months, and Apple does it. So what it does is it puts together different people and brings them together to be able to do that particular event, which happens in their office in Palo Alto and in the auditorium. Now, you would see all members of different types of teams coming together, and they are there to introduce or launch the product or whatever new product offering Apple is bringing across. Once the product is launched and the go-to-market starts, this kind of a team normally gets disbanded, and they then go back to doing their usual cores or functions that they do or perform within the company. So once the project is completed, the team tends to be disbanded, and that would be the idea of having a project team. Say, for example, if you were to look at, say, renovating a house, and that would require a couple of people to come together and work under a project leader or a team leader. And in those cases, you would generally see once the project, house renovation or restoration happens and it's completed, you would generally see contractors and different types of contractors working to complete that project would then essentially go back and start doing their usual work. So the team gets disbanded. Then we also talk about virtual teams. Sometimes you see teams being put together which are not in one geographical area. That means they're not under one roof or in one location. They are dispersed, essentially. People working within those teams are generally dispersed across either various offices or various locations where the company operates. So if I give you an example of a software organization like Facebook or Microsoft or LinkedIn or Twitter, you would generally see that these kind of organizations work in virtual teams. They have team members dispersed in different locations across the globe. And you would generally see that some part of the, when I say front end and back end, some part of the back end, which is where the teams are dispersed, are then going to be having some sort of a coordination between them to be able to still hit and achieve the objectives. For example, Facebook, if I look at, it has 6,000 engineers in India. It has maybe 2,500 engineers in the UK. It has some data centers in Sweden and Switzerland. It has some engineering team based out of the head office in the US, and also in different countries, they have different sales offices from which people actually work. Now, when we talk about virtual teams, if we look at, if they are planning a major upgrade to the software, they will have a close coordination between their project teams. These project teams which are working on, say, for example, a new code of the software, and then new algorithms which are being worked on. And at the same time, there'll be a team which will be working together to understand when these would be completed. So they swing into action from a point of view of marketing and messaging that goes across to the consumer. And then the IT team in the background tends to repurpose and then, push the updates across various devices so that customers can actually reap the benefit. So here you would see virtual teams which are dispersed. They get in touch, stay in contact through routes of using technology like video conferencing, messaging, and they are basically put together because they are having an expertise in a particular area, and they would be contributing to the achievement of the goal of the organization regardless of the location they are based. So here you might have a virtual team manager based in the UK, and he would be coordinating between programmers in India and Philippines and US, and they would be working together under his leadership as a project manager, and that would be termed as what is called virtual team. Now, there are other types as well. There are self-managed teams. Sometimes you will see that in some organizations, the manpower is very special. That means they have years of experience. They are considered subject specialists or experts within that area. And in those cases, what tends to happen is when organizations look at putting these kind of individuals together to achieve objective, they look at putting them together as what are called self-managed teams or SMTs. Sometimes they're also called senior management teams. Here, they understand what is the ins and outs of the project, what are the key responsibilities they carry, and then where, at what stage they will need to make the individual decisions to be able to move the project or the objective of the company forward. Here, in this particular aspect, when I look at the concept of self-managed teams or SMTs, there is very little direct supervision. There is very little interaction or any sort of, let's say, I want to use the right word, which is, say some sort of influence. People from outside, or people, when you are given absolute responsibility to be able to run this project as a self-managed team, then there is no outside, pressure or influence can be applied in order to, get things done. So here, because the individuals themselves taking on that responsibility, they are given independence. They are given the ability to be able to make their own decisions. And sometimes because of the skill set that they've acquired and the experience they've had over the years, allows them to collectively look at, moving forward. But the entire decision-making authority tends to rest with one or two individuals, and they do not need any permissions or approvals for them to be able to make that decision to get things moving or get things to a closure. So in those cases, you would generally see teams, people being brought across being subject specialists, have years and years of experience. They're considered to be experts in that area in which they have been given responsibility. And that is why they're able to manage themselves in terms of timing, motivation, achievement of goals. And in some cases, if collaboration is required, or for example, they need to look at maybe, dipping into some additional resources, they are able to do so because of the independent decision-making process and the management having the confidence that these, this particular team will be able to, deliver on the results because they've collated experts from different areas of the business to come together to be able to, say, solve a particular problem or take a particular project forward. Then we talk about matrix teams. Now here, as I explained earlier, matrix teams tend to be wherein you would have administrative reporting to somebody, but you might be functionally reporting to somebody in the other location. And that tends to be an example when we look at big organizations like Microsoft. Now, there is a senior vice president for Xbox or gaming service in Microsoft. And obviously, Xbox as a gaming service is prevalent in many countries across the globe. So you might be a product manager for Xbox in India or in US or in UK or in Germany, but you might be administratively reporting to the general manager or the MD in that location, managing director, but you would also have a cross-functional reporting into somebody who manages the portfolio based out of the head office in the US. And there is where you will get to see matrix kind of structure present, because you might be working on a day-to-day basis with a particular team, but at the end of the day, you also are required to report into your functional head, and that could be based out of the head office. So in those cases, you would generally see this structure being present or prevalent in large organizations which are based out of different countries, different geographies, and have lots of products and services. Now, there could be other teams as well, leadership teams, task force committees, as we call them, and they are generally made up of senior members. So an example here would be a board of a company. Now, that would be considered as a leadership team. So when I talk about the Twitter board, Elon Musk is the CEO, but along with him, there are 3 or 4 other influential members which are responsible for deciding the direction in which how Twitter is governed and how policies and procedures within Twitter are enacted. That would be the function of what is called the leadership team. Although it is headed by Elon Musk, who's the chief executive, but at the end of the day, there is a board in that organization, and they are made up of senior management teams or members, and they are responsible for taking high-level decisions, executive decisions, which are looking at managing the overall performance of the company. And then when we look at task force or committees, we generally see them in all places, especially in the UK. Say, for example, currently right now, after the COVID pandemic, a task force has been set up by the government, and they will look into investigation, and the reasons and causes behind why we needed to have lockdowns, why there were so many deaths in the UK because of COVID. And this particular team, which normally is created and works across, tends to be, what are called task forces or committees. And they normally do a lot of research, and then they present, their findings in terms of the research over a period of time, and they would be termed as, task force or task committees. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, when we look at, if we take this a bit further, and when we look at dipping into what is the importance of, say, work groups? Why do we need work groups within a particular location or a particular, organization? And when we talk about work groups, what we are looking at is groups which are formed, within the organization, who would normally be a set of individuals or people working together to achieve an objective. So when I say an example of a work group example will be when I talk about departments, when I talk about task force, when I talk about divisions. Sometimes we also refer this to as what is called the SBU. Have you heard about the term or come across this term called SBU? which normally stands for strategic business unit. Now, sometimes in large organizations, when the revenue of a particular division or a revenue from a particular product becomes substantial, in those cases, sometimes what tends to happen is the company creates what is called an SBU, a strategic business unit. Now, if I give you an example of a large organization like Apple, and if we look at Unilever, for example, we look at Kraft, we look at Nestle, look at some of these large organizations, what you're going to be able to see is that within these organizations, because they have 300-400 different types of products, if you look at fast-moving consumer good organizations, FMCGs as we call them, we look at Nestle, Unilever, Kraft, Macro. When we look at Walmart, we look at these kind of organizations, what you will see is that these kind of organizations, Unilever, for example, has over 400 products that it makes, manufactures, and then sells to market. Now, when I look at just the soaps part of it, when I look at Dove, and within Dove, you have Lifebuoy, lots of different types of soap. Soap itself will be one category of product which will be bringing in maybe revenues globally of 70 to 80 billion dollars. And when we look at that bigger revenue, detergents, for example, when you look at Ariel or Surf, and if you look at these, Ariel is owned by Procter & Gamble, but if you look at Surf, for example, which has become a generic name for detergents that we use in washing machines for our clothes and things like that, that product alone would bring in maybe $3, $4, $5 billion worth of revenue globally for that company. Now, in those cases, when the company's product service brings in this much of revenue and there is a lot of people working behind the teams to be able to run that as a business, sometimes companies spin that off, spin these individual large sections of the business off as what are called SPUs, strategic business unit. So sometimes you would see that when we look at people working together in groups, and these groups tend to be, different types. So when I say departments, divisions, task force, or, strategic business units, they would generally be, important for the organization because they are generating revenue. And in terms of their working and, let's say, knowing the practices in terms of what they need to do, people working within those groups, they would have it very clear. And that one person managing that group would be, generally the head or the president of that strategic business unit. And that person would report into the chief executive, because that product itself is so big enough that it is bringing in revenues which are bigger than which are going to be very big, let's say they would be substantially contributing towards, the turnover or the profitability or the bottom line of the company. Now, when we look at people working in groups, here, the idea of working in groups is essentially to promote what is called, teamwork. That means a bit of cohesion, people coming together, cooperating with each other, and also at the same time, they would be looking at, being able to work on tasks or execute, tasks which are going to be, achieving certain objectives of the company in a shorter duration or in a more structured manner within the organization. So when I say when people work, effectively in a group, and because they've been brought together to achieve a larger objectives, not individual objectives, you would generally come across the term work groups. I think that is what you would need to understand. And then the other reason why work groups are created is that because organizations are looking at bringing productivity into the organization, and that productivity essentially allows them to then achieve a larger objectives. Sometimes you would see that let's give you an example, that sometimes you would see generally that people are brought together from different departments into doing or maybe collaborating on a larger objective. Now that could be, for example, if the company is deploying resources. To give you an example here, let me say, for example, there is a huge construction project which is now coming up in, say, Saudi, which is the wall city, which is being built in, Saudi Arabia. Now, if you see that as a project, what the management and the team has decided is that they're going to complete the first phase of that project by 2025. They want the city to be connecting, I think, some part of Saudi Arabia from one side to the other, and they are looking at completing that project by 2030. Now, there are lots of resources, when I say resources, means financial, administrative, human manpower, physical resources and resources, infrastructure resources. They're all being pooled together to try and achieve that objective. Now, when we look at this project, there would have been a work group which would have been formed, which will oversee how this project is being run, execution is happening, and where are the areas this work group would be responsible for picking out is where the streamlining needs to happen, or where more resources, whether it's financial, administrative, manpower, need to be put in order for the project to keep track with what has been set in stone as a timeline for completion. So when we look at work groups, there are various reasons why work groups are created within organization. Work groups thrive on team working. That means they will work collaboratively in organizations to achieve and work towards a singular objective, which is the group objective or the organizational objective, which needs to be realized. Now, there are several advantages of having work groups within organization. You see this as a working structure in even small organizations, and the reason why is that work groups tend to give lots of benefits. Now, one example of a small work group within an organization would be that if I look at, say, picking out an organization which is into accounting and finance. So when I talk about an organization within accounting and finance, you would generally see that there are lots of different people working within that organization. Some would be bookkeepers, some would be managing customer and clients, some would be accountants, some would be management accountants, some of them would be financial accountants, but essentially you would see they all have one common area or common strength, which is that they understand and they know finance. Now, because they have different clients, for example, this accountancy group has maybe 1,000 clients. What they would want to do is, if there are problems that they encounter with one account in terms of, say, filing of accounts, or in terms when they are finalizing the account, they would get that experience to be used into other customers as well, from a point of view of working as a work group, which would mean problem solving. If there are problems which come up of one type, problems which come up with one such company or accounts, then they are able to use that, let's say, situation to learn. And from there, they can then innovatively apply that solution to another company or set of, clients where a similar set of problems may arise in the future. And this would provide, the accountancy firm with some sort of an edge over why they would want people to have a good understanding of not just running their side of roles and responsibility, but also the understanding of the type of role and responsibility which the other person in the same group is performing, so that if that person is to take a day off or is off sick, then the person who works very closely with him would be able to understand and meet the requirements for a few days or for a number of days, for the days which the other person is in absence or has a sickness, and because of which has taken a leave or absence. Now, work groups also lead to what is called improved decision making, because decision making as a process is having a bit of a soundboard wherein people within different areas would come together, but they will come together and discuss that, will this work? Will this work in the favor? Will this be helping us to achieve this objective? So there'll be lots of discussions and debates which will happen, which will constructively move things forward, but it will also be looking at producing efficiency and improvement in the case of decision making. One of the reasons which is obvious is that when people work together, sometimes you hear the term 1 + 1 makes 11. in the context of team working, rather than 1+1 making 2. So in sometimes this particular acronym which is used, 1+1 makes 11, is because if a lot of people are working within an organization and they're working towards a particular goal to be able to achieve, then in those cases, what you will generally see is that the productivity of the organization would tend to increase. And here, because there's interdependency on each other, for you or for somebody else to be able to complete the job, even in your absence on a particular date, that would mean that there is dependency, there is a relationship, there is a one-on-one working which is happening between you and your colleagues, and that reflects or shows increase in productivity, because even if you are absent on a particular day, that would not mean that the work doesn't get done, but the work gets done because of the fact that there is dependency amongst team members working within that team. Now, we will also look at other advantages, and these could look at things like flexibility. This could also look at more job satisfaction. This could look at obviously improved communication. This could also mean that people, if I'm sick or if I'm overloaded, I could speak to my colleague, and because we work together collaboratively under one work group, then if there are goals which are slipping, or if there are goals that need to be completed, and because we are in the same working group, what that will allow us to do is that, say, for example, if I was supposed to complete something, but I'm running late or I'm not being able to manage that accurately, then I might seek help from my subordinate or somebody within the team that I'm close to, and that would mean that I could request him or her to say, could you help me finish this particular bit, because I'm tied up with some of the other activities and they would require immediate attention. So in some cases, you would see the shared goal and accountability also contributing towards the working as individuals in a work group. Now, there could be lots of different reasons in terms of why work groups and working within teams is effective and is recognized within organizations as a route to getting greater things done or getting bigger things done. Now, this tends to be because of the fact that there are these advantages that we've discussed, which come across from people working in teams, which would mean that they're working synergistically, they are working together, they are being cohesive in terms of their communication, and also ensuring that if somebody falls back or falls behind, then the other member, because of the nature of that, how they work, and they are in the same teams, they're able to pick it up and then still achieve the objective set in the time frame which the organization wants them to be achieved. So when we look at talent development and we look at learning opportunities, you would also see that at some stage, if you started off at 20 to 23 and you've had a number of trainings throughout your career, and then at some stage, what happens is when it comes to you being promoted or you getting an opportunity to get promoted, you would then see that HR or your immediate manager would see this as an opportunity for development of talent. In order for the organization to retain you, they would then also look at the aspect of maybe offering you a promotion, or in some cases also looking at expanding your work or the day-to-day responsibility that you have, because they feel that you're able to do this perfectly well, and that would mean opportunities for an individual to learn as well. Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, after understanding what is organization structure, organizational types of teams which can be formed in different types of structures, we have looked at a bit on work groups, and we have also looked at how effectively teams work, or why individuals are essentially asked to work in teams. Now, one of the other things that we want to understand is what is the reason why teams are formed within organization. What are the main reasons behind why at some stage when a company grows to a certain size or has a certain scale in terms of its turnover or a number of customers, why would it look at making team working compulsory, or starts to create teams, which would mean groups of people working together? Now, some of the reasons that we need to understand in terms of why this as an approach has now become a standard in businesses and across organizations is because of globalization. Now, and one of that reason is globalization. The other is the influx of technologies which the businesses need to embrace to be able to tackle with competition or meet customer demands. So the second reason is technology or adoption of technology. The third one that we look at is in terms of, as companies go to different geographies to be able to sell their products, they also at some stage look at embracing diversity, because it is going to be easier for the company to look at taking on local manpower, which has good market knowledge, which can inform you about what is good or bad about the product or the service that they're trying to sell, and would also make them familiar with the local culture and obviously the requirements to be able to sell products in that geography. A simple example: when we look at McDonald's, now McDonald's is present in over 200 countries, but in some countries it does not sell certain types of products. For example, in Middle Eastern countries, it does not sell products which have pig or pig meat in it, or a variant of pig meat in it. Now, why is this so? Because they recognize that the cultural differences in that region would mean that this type of product cannot be sold there. But the reverse side, the advantage to them is that if they are looking at embracing diversity and understanding the culture of that location, and then going about changing things in terms of how they address the market, this will not only show that the company is willing to adapt to the local customs and traditions which people believe in, but at the same time also looking at embracing the culture and diversity in that location to be able to address business or get business. Now, in some cases, some markets, some companies leave because they're not able to look at understanding or developing an understanding of the local culture, the dialect, the language, and the traditions which they are. And that means it's a loss of business to the organization, or in some cases, we put it this way, that they are failed ventures of the company when they try to expand or go to a different territory. Now, all these are different reasons of why companies at some stage, when they become big in size, look at putting people into groups or look at working within teams. Now, you might have a geographical reason, because you're expanded to a country beyond your borders. So when I look at Tesco, for example, in the UK, you see Tesco successfully, they have tried to expand to different countries. One country in which they failed, and obviously ultimately they withdrew the operations, is in the US. Now, in those cases, the company initially and the management initially looked at that, yes, there would be a good market for the products on that side. And because the company itself is quite huge, it will be able to utilize its strengths to be able to create its presence in the US. Now, in this case, they went into the US market, but also withdrew a couple of years back with heavy losses because they failed to understand the diversity and address the root issue, which is intense competition from the local players like Seven and Walmart in particular, because they had larger economies of scale and they had larger customers which were essentially buying goods from them rather than the new stores or new entrant from Tesco. Now, if we understand why, so the reverse side that we want to understand is, why do we look at putting people into what are called diverse teams? and why do we need to have work groups, or why do we need people to work within teams in particular, if we look at, and these reasons would be globalization, adoption of new technology, as I mentioned, and then issues which come across, primarily when companies want to expand to a particular geography. And these issues could be related to diversity and culture within that particular location. So it is important sometimes for the companies to hire local people and get them into their workforce and get them to work in teams with the teams from head office, because it helps build understanding. And because of better communication, understanding of culture, and obviously, adoption of local customs and traditions into the business allows them to be then successful by launching products which are meeting the expectations of the customers in that market. And these are reasons why you would look at sometimes organizations when they expand because of growing business. And then they also look at the embracing of technology. Then you would generally see that people would be asked to work as not as individuals, but work within teams to be able to achieve, or to be able to help the organization achieve that objective. Now, when we talk about different types of technology, it could be a reason why the company has to do this is because, one, the competition has embraced it. Second, it is a required or a minimum requirement as a threshold to enter that market. In some cases, you would generally see that technology helps the company to increase productivity and efficiency. And last but not the least, technology, because if you're looking at working across different teams and you have cross-functional teams, you are expanding to a different location. Sometimes you would see technology will also help in, speeding up the process of communication, or making the communication process more effective, training part of it more effective. And those are the reasons why you would generally see people are asked to work within teams, and companies or managers and leaders in companies would essentially then look at, let's look at, putting structures which would require working of groups in teams. Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, when we look at some of the other aspects in terms of challenges that we can face when we have different types of teams, one of the reasons I've not chosen challenges of cross-functional teams, functional teams, matrix teams is because they tend to be easily understood and obviously managed, because people are either in one location or dispersed in different branch offices, but that understanding and working can happen. One of the main things that we look at wherein there could be significant challenges which come up is when in organizations you generally see the formation of what is called virtual teams. That means the manpower or the resources in terms of human manpower is dispersed across different locations. And these dispersed, when I say different locations, they might not be in one particular location or country. They are dispersed across in different countries. And that is where we would see that companies would need to invest in technology, and they would need to look at managing some of these, the structure of the organization, which is people working in different locations virtually, and that would be through what is called the formation of virtual teams. Now, here you would have a manager. Say, for example, you look at IBM Global Services. It has over 12,000 employees in India. There are some employees based here, and there are similar number of employees based in other countries, especially the US. And outside US, India is the largest headcount of IBM from a point of view of services which it provides to various banks, customers, or any such organization. So here, when we look at the example of a virtual team, and an example typically I will give you is, for example, if we see Facebook as an organization or IBM as an organization I mentioned, then you would generally see the back-end operations are all managed out of India. The front-end all operations are managed out of UK or one of the other countries in Europe. And here what will happen is there'll be a lot of cross collaboration which will happen between different members of the team. There'll be a manager or a project manager or a group project manager who will be sitting in one location, and there are employees based out of different locations, working in different teams. And the responsibility of the project manager or the group project manager is to essentially bring them together, agree them together on some objectives which they're trying to fulfill, and then get them to deliver on those objectives. So in this case, managing of virtual teams or cross-cultural teams essentially becomes quite important and quite critical. Now, there are lots of challenges in such cases to manage that, and that could be because time zone differences. For example, if you think of, if I'm based in the US, I know that on our team as well, when you're attending, one of you is based in Los Angeles, the other is based in India, and then and then one of you are based here, and I have one student who's based in Riyadh. So you're all in different time zones. In order for me to look at collaborating and obviously, delivering a session, I need to pick and choose a time wherein you are all able to attend and have that session. So this could be one challenge, which is, challenge of time difference, because you're all based in different locations. Now, the other bit is I need to use technology to be able to reach out to you. So the technology that I'm using right now, as an example, is Zoom meetings. And because of this particular feature or technology that I have, I'm still able to get all of you onto one session, and then basically have a holistic discussion on, maybe the studying of this unit and some of the other units. Now, the use of technology also, to a certain extent, helps me do and conduct proper communication or, effective communication. And this, in some cases, also is leading to me addressing some of the, let's say, challenges that I face or I need to overcome, which are in terms of objections or questions when sometimes you ask, and they are all, a part of, say, managing a virtual team or a cross-functional virtual team. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Right. So here the concept that we want to look at in particular when we talk about virtual teams is to know what could be the challenges, that I would face in particular when I'm dealing with, virtual teams. People, when they are dispersed in different locations. So IBM's backend is in India, marketing office is in the US, the engineering side of the team is in the Indian context. But you have the testers and programmers based out of US, Europe, India, and the Far East. But the head office in terms of marketing, communication tends to be based out of the US. So here, somebody who's looking at managing and, looking at, say, delivering an output in terms of a product, would find it difficult if they don't have technology and they have to deal with people in different time zones from different cultural background. And in some cases, with different experience and academic, qualifications, then it would become quite difficult for that person to, manage them. Now, how the managing of that tends to happen is happening through open and clear communication channels. It's happening through the use of technology. It is happening through the use of, I would say, resources which can be deployed to bring all of them together onto a same platform, so that discussions, decision making, and working collaboratively can happen to achieve the organizational objective. For example, I gave you a mention of something like last session, that if Facebook is looking at tweaking the timeline in their product, you would generally see 6,000-7,000 engineers working on it. At some stage, when the work is completed, product testing would start. When product testing finishes, there'll be a beta release or a release to, say, a limited set of audiences in a geography to test it out, get some feedback. And then in about a period of time, over a month or so, when this data is collated, collected, analyzed, the company would then decide to do a launch, global launch that would cover and show the product or showcase the product again. So in this case, you would see that people would work within teams to get the objective fulfilled. There will be a lot of team cohesion. That means collaborative working. There'll be use of technology. The managers managing those teams will have to have very good understanding of diverse cultures, requirements, and obviously pressure points, if I use that word, to understand that, okay, I can push this person this much, but beyond that, it is not going to work, and I might not have the work output coming, but it might become negative. So in those cases, you would see that the person managing this centrally from one location would essentially also be a strong leader and would have a lot of experience in managing the people within different cultures, and would maybe do so only through the use of technology. So sometimes we see team calls happening. A pure example that we see people from different locations log in through the VPN and they are on a team call. We are doing a Zoom meeting right now, and there are 3-4 of you which are in different locations, and we are doing this primarily as a session using technology. So this is, and I am in a way managing this session virtually by managing you all as a member of my team. As a tutor, I'm delivering this session. I have Hira or Nandish and Faizan, and you are my team members in a way, my students, and you are listening into the session, tuning into it. And this is like a virtual team that we are managing, because we are all dispersed. We are not in a single location. We are using technology, and obviously some of the expertise that we have got over the years that we've used to deliver this qualification. And that is where you are coming together to study this. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, what are the tools which will help us in doing this collaborative work in terms of overcoming some of the challenges when we have people dispersed in different locations? So technology comes to our rescue. And when we talk about technology, one of the aspects of technology that we get to see that is put into practice is different types of tools which help us do communication, management of certain activities. Now, there are softwares like Monday.com that we've heard about when we go to YouTube, project collaboration softwares. We look at Slack, for example. We look at Trello, for example, Microsoft Teams, Zoom. These are all different types of softwares which essentially are considered digital tools for communication, and they would help us, work together collaboratively with different members within the team who are based out of different locations. So here, most of you have heard and used Skype. Some of you may have used Microsoft Teams. Some of you may have used Slack as well, which is like a WhatsApp, but a corporate version of the messaging platform, which companies might not use WhatsApp openly, but they might use something which is much more secure and can be integrated with their CRM like Salesforce or HubSpot or Zoho CRM, and they would use something like Slack, which would help in real-time communication. And this is a messaging platform primarily for businesses. Now, in project management, there are lots of different types of project management tools like Smartsheets and Trello, and they are essentially used by organizations to bring across productivity, get everybody to the same plane, let everybody sing from the same songbook in a way. And these platforms, which are digital tools, allow collaboration to happen, better communication to happen, efficiency and productivity to be brought in while people work in teams or groups together. Is that okay? So I put some slides together, primarily they are theoretical and they have to be read to understand, what technologies can be aiding this particular process of, teams working together. And if we face challenges of being in different locations, spread geographically, but we are still collaborating or working together on projects, then in those cases, technology comes to the rescue. And there are different forms of technology which can be used to collaborate and work together to be able to achieve the objective. So some of them are like Google Workspace, Office 365. Now you can open any document from anywhere in the world. You don't need that document to be stored on your PC. It can be stored on the cloud, and wherever you have a subscription with Office 365, you can log into a public network or from a public PC or even your phone and still have access to that document, because that document is now on the cloud. And these technologies typically would be the ones that we get to see, from a point of view of tools which would aid in better communication. And better communication would mean that we are able to see people work effectively together in groups. And that group work or teamwork would then allow the organization to help achieve objectives which are set, goals which are set, monthly goals, weekly goals, quarterly goals, yearly goals which are set. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Any questions on this? I've got one. Yeah, Discord as well. That's correct. We used to have lots of different types of these technologies like ICQ, MSN Messenger, Yahoo Messenger. Some of them have got, they're faded away because of the, let's say the technologies which have improved over the years. And some of these have become de facto standards. Some of them have faded away because there are much more advanced tools now available to be able to collaborate and coordinate in order to get, work done. And as COVID was a good example that even with lockdowns and people not being able to come to work, they were initially organizations struggled, but once they used technology to overcome the challenges faced because of remote working, this was then enabled, and you would see companies like Zoom and some of the other companies which promoted obviously had products which allowed people to collaborate remotely. They had a tremendous boost in their revenue and obviously growth they enjoyed during this period was fantastic, because this allowed them to be used as digital tools. And because the situation was such that organizations could not have people coming into the workplace, remote working became something like a de facto standard. And that meant that a lot of companies had to embrace and bring in and adapt their existing technologies with the latest technologies in the market to be able to allow people to work from home and continue operations. Now, at this stage, what I would do is primarily stop for today. The reason I would do that is if I just switch you over to the unit specification, we have covered the first part of this learning outcome, which is learning outcome 3. Now, it covers things like different forms of teams, why do we need to work, and what is the importance of work groups and teams. We look at different types of teams that we've discussed, what is the impact of technology, and obviously, in some cases, why we need to look at using technology to be able to make sure effective team working can happen. There is cohesion between the members of the team, and those challenges which are challenges faced because of globalization, adaptation of technology by competitors, and in some cases, diverse cultures and people working in dispersed locations require us to embrace technology and then use that as I would say, technology comes to the rescue to use it and then get things done or get efficiency and productivity going. We also briefly looked at some of the digital tools which I think are important that we need to be aware of, which can be used as managers. And sometimes in order to speed up communication and collaboration, or maybe effectiveness in terms of working, communication of information, we need to use these tools. And then these tools can be, some of them are cloud-based, and cloud-based technologies like Dropbox, Zoom that we are using right now allow sharing of information to happen seamlessly. And this means that a lot of work let's say technically was only possible when people were based in one location, now can be done remotely, because information and tools which are available because of advancement in technology allow people to collaborate and even work together from remote locations, geographically dispersed locations, without having to be in one location to get things done or achieve the goals which have been set. So here is where we would stop, and then we will pick up tomorrow when we start discussing the team dynamics and teamwork models to be able to close learning outcome 3. Is that okay? Now, this particular presentation is going to be up on Moodle. So I have the whole presentation is available. So what I would do is for tomorrow's session, if you want to read ahead into the presentation, there are 2 other handouts which I will also include. One is the Dr. Belbin's team models, and the other is the Tuckman's model, and that would be something that you can read into for the purposes of discussion into our session tomorrow. So this presentation would be available upon Moodle, and we will start our session on time tomorrow. Hopefully, I had a bit of a running extended session with some assignment discussion with the previous batch. So what we are going to do is start on time and hopefully finish learning outcome 3 tomorrow with regards to covering team dynamics and teamwork. And if you have any questions, do write them down, send them on email or write them down. And what we could then do is discuss them for tomorrow's session before we start discussion on the second part of this learning outcome 3. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Good stuff. Any questions with anybody else? Faizan, any questions at your end? Okay, and that's fine. And I think Hira has dropped off. So I will see you guys tomorrow with regards to the part